It is so good to be with all of you today. Thanks for joining us. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, and I hope that this talk will inspire you as much as I'm inspired by you. I think each and every one of us has a story about being an underdog at some point in our lives. There are very few people who just show up and become the quarterback of the football team and end up becoming the main person doing anything. And so always keep in mind that we are all, in our own sense, underdogs. And so when we talk about the power of the underdog, we talk about what are the characteristics of an underdog. Let's think about that for a moment. People think about underdogs sometimes as being weak or unsure or unaware, insecure, inept. These are things that not only do other people tell us, we tell ourselves, right? These are the feelings that sometimes we have as underdogs. But I'm here to tell you today that instead, I think underdogs are strong, determined, aware, secure, and very able-bodied. And that's something to keep in mind. But you know, it's the struggle that the underdog feels each and every time they stand up to do something that makes them thrive. It is through the tears, through the pain, through the uncertainty that we find our true strength. We have so often in the media made it so easy to say, this person went from doing this, and look at how they became successful. But really, we know that there's more nights like that than there are nights of what we saw Rocky doing, which was saying, look at me, I'm great. I got to tell you, I will never forget sitting in a cold classroom in a seat that looked very similar to this, and I was shaking. Every single Wednesday at 2:30, I would shake. I would shake not because the chair was cold and I was wearing shorts, but because I knew what was coming at the door at 2:30 on a Wednesday. And there it was, knock, knock, knock at 2:30. I heard the roar of giggling and laughter, people snickering and making fun of me as I got up, shaking to get to that front door. And as I looked through the door that doesn't look dissimilar to the doors in this room, big wooden doors with a small glass pane, I looked through the window and there I saw her. Her long, curly brown hair, her forgiving blue eyes. There she was, Dr. Freed. And she would say, Roop, are you ready? And I'd say, let's do this. And I would walk down the hallway all the way to a small conference room where I would sit for a half hour. And in that half hour, that woman helped transform this underdog into a believer in myself. That woman is a speech therapist. You see, when I was a little boy, I had a speech impediment. I couldn't pronounce my S's or my T's. And I wanted badly to be a television anchor even back when I was 8 years old. I used to tape the news every night. I would actually record the news so I could go home and watch newscasts. Not a lot of fun to be around, obviously, if that's what I was doing when I was 8 years old, right? But the bottom line is, it was that kid who wanted to do something that was told they couldn't that really created that power of the underdog inside. This is the young man who was that kid. And when I turned on the news each and every day, I wanted badly to be the television anchorman that I am today. And I was told over and over again that people who look like you don't belong on television. Think about that for a moment. People who look like you don't belong on television here in America. And if you really think about it, it's not just what people, the doubters, said to me that I believed. It was easy to see. Ever since I was a little boy, the only people who were anchor men in America looked either white or black. If you were a white man or a black man, you belong at the anchor desk. If you look like anybody else, you probably don't. And then something else happened. We noticed that people said, no, Roop, that's not true. In the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of Asian and Indian and a lot of women who were on television. Think about this for a moment. A lot of women who are minorities were getting into television, but still no men. Why was that? There's a couple reasons. One, Indian parents, I don't want to speak for all ethnic groups, but Indian parents would discourage their kids from doing anything but medicine or engineering. You have two choices. And so on one end, I was getting fought from the inside of my own troop, my own tribe, so to speak. People who looked like me were the people who discouraged me the most. Think about that. The people who looked like me were the ones who discouraged me the most. The people who encouraged me were white, black, Arab, Asian, other people would go, Roop, you can do this. Because it wasn't their son, right? And I saw a lot of people like Connie Chung, who you see behind us in the 90s. Look, there's Asian people on TV. Never a man. And then there was a lot of women that were African American. that were on television that became first. This is Bill Bonds, who was an anchor back here in Detroit back in the 70s and 80s, and his partner Diana Lewis, who is an inspiration to so many people, as she should be. She was one of the first female black anchor women to make the salary that she made and had the prominence that she had because of her brilliance, her intelligence, her grace, and her charm and her ability. I grew up watching all these stories unfold all the time, but I looked around and I never saw Asian men, black, Indian men, Arab American men. It was always white and black. Until this day, if you go anywhere in the country, you turn the television on, what do you see? White men and black men as the lead anchormen. Maybe a Hispanic man here and there. So I was up against this current of bosses in the television industry who believed that the only people who can really command the respect of being a newsman at the anchor desk are black or white men. The last time I checked from the U.S. Census Bureau, this country is made up of a heck of a lot more than just two colors. And if we really talk about taking those numbers out and talk about what really representation looks like all of us. We all belong. I always find it very interesting. Racism is a very scary thing to a lot of people. I think there's a ridiculous part of racism, a part that makes me shake my head and think racism is just plain stupid. It really is. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I don't use that word very often, but when it comes to racist people, I think there's a lot of stupidity involved. My father and mother came to this country in 1973 not because they were trying to escape something in India. They had a very good life in India. They had people who washed their clothes and cooked their dinners, and they had big houses, and they had a car. They had everything they needed. My mom and dad could have stayed there and done just great, just fine. But they chose to give up all of that, come here with no money. Why? There was a drought of engineers in America in the 70s. This country is built by immigrants, white, black, Indian, all of the people who came here, some on their own will, some who did not come on their own will, but built on the backs of the talent that came from outside of this country. The founding fathers weren't even from here. And so when we think about how stupid racism is, how dumb it is to think this way, the very people who tell my people to go back to where we came from, my mom and dad were invited to come here. There was a drought of engineers in 1973, and my dad saw, he was working at Ford in India, and there was a big sign with Uncle Sam saying, "We want you," and it said, "Engineers wanted in America." So he comes to America, gives up all of that. My mom comes here. She had never cleaned a toilet in her life, never cooked a meal all on her own in her life, and moved here in a small apartment complex, walking in the snow to go to Kmart to get diapers for me and my brother. And in the meantime, would come home and clean a toilet and looked at my dad one day and said, "Why did we come here? Why did we leave all this luxury that we had to come here?" Because our kids can become anything they want to be in America. That's what they believed. And so when I told my dad and mom, I want to go into television, I am very grateful for one thing that they did. Instead of discouraging me like my aunts and uncles and aunties and uncles, as we call them in Indian culture, your mom and dad's friends, who would ridicule me and try to ridicule me out of this lost career move that I was going into, they instead encouraged me. My mom and dad bought my first suit. My dad made me write every single day when I came home from school. He says, "If you want to be a journalist, you need to know how to read and write well. So read an entire article and then write a summary of that each and every day." I did that all of my childhood so that I could know how to take a big topic and to condense it and be factual and do it the right way. And so I think a little bit about how important that lesson was and why it was that I had this message in my head. This is the message when I looked in the mirror that would always resonate. You do not belong. I would come to TV newsrooms. I would visit when I was a little kid. I was 13, 14 years old, and I'd go and visit Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7. I would call the anchors and say, "May I come visit?" I never saw anyone who looked like me. And again, this is not because of racism. This is also because of the immigrant story. The men and women who came to this country in the 70s and 80s and thought, my kid can't do that, so I'm not going to encourage him. In fact, I want to discourage him from doing what he wants to do. But I would always ask my aunts and uncles, how is it that you came 10,000 miles away, took a risk, gave up everything, so that your boys and girls would end up doing exactly what they would have done if they stayed in India? That doesn't sound like a very good investment. The return on the investment is very bad there, isn't it? And they would argue back with me and say, "Well, how many Indian anchormen do you see on TV?" And I said, we have to answer that question in a different way. We have to answer the question of the underdog, not in a way that says, oh, I have to follow the script of what was before me, but breaking through and knowing that when you break through, it's uncomfortable. It's like being born again. It's not fun. And you're going to get uncomfortable. You're going to be told you don't belong. And I wish back then that I saw the guy that's on stage here today. Because if I saw someone who looked like me doing that job, maybe I would have a different thought. But all of us who are underdogs in this room know that sometimes you have to be the first to show up, to write the script for the future so other people will say, maybe I do belong. So what fuels the underdog? Rejection, doubt, insults. I had all of this, and I'm sure you have too, slung at me, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but every single day of my life. When I went to New Orleans to go anchor the news there, I covered 24 hurricanes, including Hurricane Katrina. And after seeing the devastation of Katrina and covering that terrible storm that happened in 2005, the loss of life, more than 1,400 people died, they gave us a week off. And they said, go back to your hometowns and go. You can't be exposed to this war zone of a storm and its aftermath and the failure of government that we saw after that. So go home. So I came back to Michigan, and I went to a family friend's house. And as I was sitting there eating samosas and drinking a glass of Pepsi, my mom and I were standing there, and an uncle, someone who's supposed to be a wise older person in your community, came up to me and said, why do you live in New Orleans? That's a terrible place to live. Look at what you just went through. You need to get out of this news business and do something more stable. My mother turned around, put her plate down, looked at him square in the eye, and said, we are proud of our son and the work that he has done. And as a journalist in this family, he is documenting the first draft of history when it comes to this terrible storm that's happened. So please don't insult him. He walked away, and he apologized later. Look, the underdog is used to rejection, to doubt, to insults. We also are known to break a lot of rules. You know, when I was, as an Indian American kid going to Michigan State University, should I say go green or should I leave that out? Leave it out. When I went to Michigan State University, I used to skip class in order to work in a newsroom. Often. I got a job at an ABC station in Lansing when I was 20 years old, and I would literally call the newsroom in the morning before I went to class and say, do you need me for anything? And they would say, no, we're good. You're not coming in until 3. I'd work 3 to midnight. And I said, no, do you need anything? What's going on? They'd say, well, we have a news conference. I'll come. And so then I would call my teachers up and say, I can't come. I'm sorry. I have to go to the newsroom to go do the news. Because I learned more in the newsroom than I ever learned in that classroom. And it's not politically correct to say, and it's not at a university, but it's true. Certain fields cannot be learned in a book. Journalism is one of those fields. The ethics of journalism, the writing, all of that, of course, can be learned and should be learned by a professor. And it was wonderful, and I'm so thankful that I had great professors, including Dr. Sue Carter, who taught me about ethics and law in the media. So I had great professors at Michigan State. But some of the classes where I'm sitting here in 300 people deep, and they're teaching me how a newsroom works when the person who's teaching me hadn't stepped foot in a newsroom in 28 years, I knew I would be best off going to an actual newsroom, and I did. And I enjoyed it. But I broke the rules, and my parents knew it. And they would say, you're skipping class to go to a newsroom? I said, Mom, Dad, that's the only way to become a good journalist is to go do journalism. It has to be done. I have to make the mistakes. I have to do those summaries, Dad, that you told me about in real life now. It's time. And so when you find a passion as an underdog, you break rules. You look at many routes that people go through, and instead of going through one route, you try different routes. I tried several. And you have to be ready to be rejected and to fail. And that happened to me several times. Following the leader is not the key to being an underdog. Underdogs go the other way. When you zig, they zag. That's what underdogs do. That's what you perhaps do as well. So the ultimate underdog, but that's my dog, by the way, Louise. Isn't she adorable, wouldn't you say? Ultimate underdogs overcome not despite rejection, but because of it. Rejection fuels what we do. And today, I'm able to do my job the way I do it, not because I have some special talent or I'm able to. It's because the underdog is always inside. I, till this day, when I tell stories of other people, think about who the underdogs are in a room, and I root for them louder and sometimes quietly, but I root for them the most because I think that underdogs are disruptors who change this world. And if you're an underdog and you find yourself in a situation, whether it be a social situation or a career situation, always know that other underdogs are looking out for you. And we are always looking out for one another, and you have to do the same thing. So I ask you to be an advocate for other underdogs. When you see someone who's trying something that's different, doing something that they know is right in their heart, support them. Find a way to support them. If they're getting a lot of rejection and doubt, even though that may fuel them, give them the support that you think that they need. Together, we got to remember another thing. How you perceive yourself matters. When you walk into a room, I always tell people, if you walk up and show up saying, I don't belong here, people will sense that. Believe when you're alone and you're looking in the mirror that you do belong. You belong. You belong anywhere you choose to be. And I want to thank you for letting me belong with you here at U of M Dearborn, even as a Spartan on this day. Thanks for having me, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.